Counting is wonderful, counting is marvelous, counting's terrific and how...
Hello everyone and welcome back to an exciting episode of Counting Kryptofreaks. We begin our foray into Season 3. The episode in question today is Exile. I am Captain Logan. Once again, I'm doing this show off the cuff now. I'm still counting the Kryptofreaks and the tropes and all the stuff that happens a whole bunch in the show. And we're going to go through every single episode now in commentary form as opposed to written analysis as we had before. Just did one of these last week, and I'm going to keep pumping them out once a week as much as humanly possible. Once again, Exile is today's episode, and we're going to find that a little bit has been retconned or kind of retroactively restructured a little bit. That is kind of par for the course for this show, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Quite a bit in the count this time as well, and that's usually not a good sign, although we had quite a bit to count last episode as well. So we'll see what it looks like and how I feel about it by the end. Last time I forgot to rate the episode. I do still want to do that, as that has been the Counting Kryptofreaks tradition going all the way back. The last episode I'm going to rate a 3.5, regardless of all of the complaints I had and things that I felt the need to poke fun of. I still really enjoy that episode, and for Smallville, it's certainly one of its better efforts and pretty ambitious, I think, for this show. This one is, I'll say right up front, not as good as last episode, I don't think, and I do think that we're walking some things back, and I think that there is a little bit of trying to get the audience too excited for what ends up being kind of a letdown this time, where it feels like big status quo changes might be happening, and of course that ends up not really being the case, and we're not going to allow the kind of follow-through for Jarrell that you might have hoped for. So I'm going to talk about all that and more. Let's go ahead and get right into it. If you want to watch the episode with me, once again, I'm going to be watching the episode and talking about it, and that will bring back the visual component if you're watching it along with me, and if not, I'll do my best to create some context for what I'm looking at on screen as we go through it and try to make this as listenable as possible, even as a podcast. Is everybody ready? Get out your DVD, your Blu-rays, your Hulu, however you want to watch it. Remember, again, that if you're watching Hulu with commercials, you'll have to pause between commercial breaks, and this time I'm going to try to point those out when I can, if that is helpful to people, although I imagine that we can all kind of figure that out for ourselves. Let's go ahead and get started. Here we go. Make sure and press play when I say now, and let's get started. Everybody, please press play right now. So it is 3 months later, and I don't remember if on television we got a recap before this, but it is kind of amusing to say 3 months later after nothing, that it's frame one. You say 3 months later. Later than what? Obviously, we know that this is the continuation of a cliffhanger, but it is just kind of amusing to say that without having anything on screen before that. I was looking at the ratings for this season, and it's really interesting, partly just how many more people were watching television in general back then, that a CW show, or I guess beginning on the WB into CW, that this show, even this episode, the beginning of Season 3, got almost 7 million viewers. Boggles the mind. This show was barely getting to 3 in its last season. I think the entire season it was upper 2s, and the finale got to 3. But 6.8, but a significant drop-off throughout the season. Only 5.92 are watching the finale of this season, so a whole million viewer drop-off. Is that really a $240,000 car, I wonder? And would anyone take that much money in 20s? That looks pretty suspicious, does it not? So everybody thinks that Lex is dead. The search has finally been called off. The funeral is about to happen. And of course, all the important stuff is beginning 3 months after the finale of last season. Nothing of consequence whatsoever has happened in the interim, except for maybe Chloe finding Clark a month ago. and this is what Clark imagines a bad boy is like. I don't know if that's on purpose. I don't know if the show actually thinks that he is turned into a real cool bad boy, or if it's supposed to be a farm boy's estimation of that, his imagination of that. I like it a lot, and I want to imagine that it's the latter. This is a guy that, I mean, I like the idea that someone who will eventually become Superman, of course he's not there yet, and I've talked a lot about how I very rarely ever buy that this guy actually becomes Superman, especially because of how not proactive he is, and how he tends to think about destiny before he thinks about actions and consequences. But I like the idea that the guy who would become Superman isn't capable of being any worse than this. Yeah, he'll steal, he'll rob banks, but he's not really gonna hurt anybody. He does get lucky that nobody gets killed with what he's doing. Clark, of course, has to find the last remaining phone booth. I like that quite a bit. I think that's fun. I do complain about and make fun of a lot the foreshadowing things in this show, the really obvious on-the-nose, see, like, nudge, nudge, it's Superman. But this one, I kind of like, okay. Especially because we have the tattoo thing, the brand, and he's gonna pop his shirt open, and he's got the Superman brand. He's Superman. I like that. This is the exact. This is as far as opposite Superman he's going to be, at least anything like of his own accord. Of course, at the end of the season, he's going to turn into, air quotes, Kal-El, and that's going to be much more of the opposite of Superman when he starts flying and is very much mind controlled at that point. I don't know what the correlation is between the ring and the brand flaring up. I don't know why when it flares up he has to take his ring off and then it doesn't hurt him anymore, and then he puts it back on and it doesn't immediately come back. I have no idea what's going on with the brand. And we'll find that this whole thing was Jor-El just testing him to see if he was ready to go on the next stage of his journey. And because he acted this way, Jor-El decides to just bide his time some more. Mostly so that, somebody say! Mostly so that this season can go back to something more or less like the status quo we had last season and waste some time until we get to the next big event. And it's a big unfortunate letdown. Jor-El is just dragging his feet, and they clearly didn't have any idea what they were doing with him before, and have not figured out anything after that. Once again, still really surreal watching Allison Mack after everything we have learned recently. So as I said, we've got to make sure that all the important stuff happens really conveniently exactly 3 months after the last episode, when we're back in school again, and that's a nice shot of Metropolis, which you can get to from Smallville on one road, like 45 miles an hour. Those clown masks are haunting. And hard to believe that this is before The Dark Knight, but of course it is several years before that. I'm immediately reminded of the bank scene in that. I'm sure this did not in any way inform that movie. But Rutger Hauer is here. Really excited about him and finally getting to this. It's a thing I've been, it's one of the things I've been really looking forward to getting back to. And it's only unfortunate that he's not in more episodes than he is. The guy who takes over is really good. There's our bullet time for this episode. But yeah, Rutger Hauer, I guess, was doing too much, maybe a little bit too big of a name for this show. Really cool they got him. And we get the, I won't count these because we don't do it much, but we get that kind of TV trope thing of whenever we want to replace an actor, we just have someone get surgery and change their face. That'll happen a little bit later. Clark's getting a little bit more clever on Red Kryptonite. I wish he'd come out of his shell more, because everything he does on Kryptonite, on Red Kryptonite, is stuff that he is actually capable of, and we established in Red that it's all deep-seated stuff that's really inside of him. Got a Metallica song here. That's pretty cool. My lifestyle reflects my death style. Metropolis seems like a little bit of a small city if Clark is dealing with Maggie Sawyer once again. Of course, we saw her back in Insurgents, I believe. Clark shooting his heat vision into the symbol of Superman on the front of the cop car is maybe a somewhat provocative image, although it is ridiculous that, as I've said before, that crest shows up everywhere just because this is a Superman show. It looks pretty cool with the elongated crest, though. I like that. Once again, pretty good production values in this episode. It feels like last show that a lot of the season's budget maybe went to this episode. I like getting to see what Clark would be like, you know, if he went bad and was using his powers for his own personal gain, if he was breaking that Zordon rule, were this Power Rangers, but that he's not capable of going all the way, that's not inside of him. And that makes the he's not himself thing with Red Kryptonite work better than a lot of those episodes, because it does tell us something about him. It does inform his character in some way. Yeah, we get it. We know it's been 3 months. It said so at the beginning of the episode in print. And so is this the first time they've had this conversation? I wonder. Because Clark's been stealing a lot. I mean, like, he was able to afford a $240,000 car. A $250,000 car. Surely he's been in the papers. Get out of the shower and into the Talon. When I was writing these episodes, I meant to point those out more often because some of the Talon signs in the marquee get pretty funny. So Chloe is suddenly back in character. She's likable again. She's sympathetic again. She's making the kinds of mistakes that she feels like she has to as a journalist, and having a difficult time growing out of some of those things while still doing her job. But she's not the sycophant she was. She's not constantly jealous like she was. She apologizes for that. She has grown up a lot in these 3 months, and sure, maybe some of that happened because of things we didn't see, but it reads a lot like we don't want to keep having to write her like that, and we don't really want to follow through on the promise we made last season where she's going to be kind of devious and a little evil and work for Lionel. That was one of the big cliffhanger things, and I had every reason to expect that into this season, for at least a while, she was going to ride that wave, and it was going to be catastrophic for her, and she was going to have a hard time climbing back out of it and being friends with Clark and Lana again, and that is not what happens. Now she's much more of the voice of reason, and she's not rolling her eyes at Lana anymore because she and Clark were dating. And yeah, maybe she's had a big dose of reality because Clark ran away from home and has been gone all this time, and maybe because she's having to be the responsible one in you know, keeping his secret and trying, because he's forced her to. I mean, that I appreciate and understand. If this ultimatum that he gives her, another impossible situation, kind of like Jarrell's with Clark last season. I understand why she feels the need not to tell anyone about it. I would maybe understand it more if she knew he had superpowers, because being the investigative journalist she is, it's hard for me not to think that she might use her sleuthing skills and, frankly, the duplicity that she's built lately to go behind Clark's back in order to save him. So I guess I'm conflicted about that. I said I understand it. The more I'm talking about it, maybe it's maybe I don't love it, but it at least does seem like a thing he would do. Clark has a kryptonite shirt. He has a shirt with an upside-down piece of kryptonite. What is that? Looks like a Chaos Emerald. Who designed that shirt? How is it in the show? That is ridiculous. It's hilarious. Good old Rucker Hauer. Playing Morgan Edge, who is one of our recurring DC characters from the comics. Morgan Edge is a crime boss going all the way back to the Jimmy Olsen comics. and he's even in episodes of the radio show, if memory serves. And has been on TV a surprising amount. He shows up in the 3rd season of Supergirl, which I have not watched a whole lot of yet, but he's played there by the guy from Heroes, Adrian Pasdar. Who's the guy in Heroes who can fly and is the president in what, a future continuity, or he actually becomes president? I can't remember now. It's been so long since I've watched that show. Nathan Petrelli. Once again, too bad we couldn't have had him more in this show. I think he's only in a couple episodes. Chloe, how'd you get in the cave? I guess Lionel, now that he doesn't have his octagonal key and the kryptonite key and can't get into the wall because it's been sealed up. Oh, he just appears. Speak the devil's name and he will appear. I could have done that in a Bane voice, but too little, too late. So the scaffolding is all gone. He's not testing things in the cave anymore. And that's fair, because he just wanted to get into the wall. I guess I understand why Lionel doesn't try to break into the cave, because he wouldn't want to ruin the keyhole and the technology underneath, if he even understands that it is technology. This is weird exposition retroactively after the fact. It's really strange that that wasn't put into last episode. And if memory serves, we watched it together. I do not remember a scene where the cave wall has been sealed up, but maybe as I was talking over it, I missed it. But watching that episode twice, I do not remember that part. That is a good line. Worst sin of age is to forget the trials of youth. I like that Chloe actually does seem like a decent writer. I also like that we don't know a lot, we don't know anything yet about what Chloe's been doing, so it seems like suddenly she's deciding to go behind, or to go against Lionel, and she's seeming more reasonable, and like she has her wits about her, and has grown up again, but we find out that she's actually been dealing with Clark for the last couple of months, and so it's not as bad as it could be. It doesn't feel totally retconny. It's just that it doesn't fulfill a promise that was kind of given to us last episode. And, I mean, she's not obnoxious now, so I appreciate that. But it might have been interesting to see Chloe go off the deep end and go real evil and kind of become, you know, Lex because of Lionel. Were it more about her being seduced? I like this transition a lot. More about her being seduced than it was about simply jealousy. And so, with what they set up, that would not have been so interesting and would have felt incredibly melodramatic. And speaking of melodramatic, here is... That was a commercial break. Yeah, I'm not keeping up with those real well. So if you are watching this with commercials, forgive me, and try to find those pause spots yourself, because I'm always in the middle of a thought when we get through those. But yeah, speaking of melodrama, Lex has been crashed in an airplane and left for dead by Helen, who apparently just wanted to marry him for his money, even though there was not a lot, I should say, to indicate that. It seems like an 11th hour choice, and clearly Emmanuel Vagwer, however you pronounce her last name, also was not aware of that, because when we see her a little bit later in this episode, it's going to be like that 24 sudden mole change in actors' performances where we realize, where the actor and us simultaneously finds out they're bad and starts playing it that way, even though they haven't been the entire time. Rosenbaum is clearly having a ball. He loves playing crazy. he seems to really like this stuff. This island thing is maybe a little bit typical. I like things about it. I'm glad that we don't stretch it out and spend any more time here than we do. I'm glad that it doesn't go over multiple episodes, and I'm glad that it's as efficient as it is. It's pretty economical. Lex has conversations with this hallucination who he doesn't realize is a hallucination until the end of the episode. I think it's predictable. I don't think it's really a surprise when it turns out that this guy is actually all in Lex's head. Plenty of clues. It's maybe, again, kind of the obvious thing to do, but we don't waste a ton of time on it, and he is, we're kind of finding that he's maybe already, at least in his mind, too far gone. I think we're still in a place where Lex could be saved at this point if only he made the right decisions and didn't give in to his anger and his insecurities. But Lex on the island ends up killing this guy who is actually in his head. And I find myself asking the question at the end of the episode, does he kill him out of self-defense, or does he kill him because he doesn't like what he sees in himself? This guy being the personification of what Lex will become if he continues on the path that he has been going. This guy's going to give him a backstory that is, of course, very similar to his own, about how his father was a horrible person who never, nothing the guy did was ever good enough, and he just kept chipping away. We'll get to that scene here in a little bit. A little surprised this funeral's not any bigger than it is. And if this was like a show funeral, I would maybe kind of understand that. If it was like Lionel, because initially I thought that Helen and Lionel were in cahoots. Both when I watched this and a little bit last episode, I must confess, I forgot that they weren't actually in league. So when they're talking in the hallway, that's a red herring for the audience. I mean, last episode, when Lex walks in on them and we're supposed to think that there's more going on in that hallway than what they're talking about. It turns out that it really was just Lionel trying to give her a wedding present and her wanting nothing to do with him. But that is because she was planning on killing Lex and taking his money as a Black Widow. No, Chloe, you're a completely different person. I also meant to mention on the island that, as I said last episode, I don't buy that Lex survived that plane crash. That would have to be the Lost Island, right? So, somebody intentionally pulled him out of that plane mystically and put him on that island. How in the world did he survive that? He was in the cockpit, and we saw the glass hit the water. And the first time I saw that when it aired, I was like, there's just no way. It looked really good, they took it too far. So, suddenly the Kents are losing the farm, and we have really yo-yoed this back and forth, and it's been really too easy. They were in financial straits last season, they kind of magically got out of it, and Clark said last episode his parents are out of debt. Yeah, everything has to be a matter of extremes. And I didn't talk about this much last episode, but of course, Clark's life has to be almost perfect before we drag it down. And of course, you want that kind of contrast, but you want to naturally get us there. So it all happened too easily, right? Too quickly. His parents were losing the farm, and then they weren't, and that was only a couple episodes before that. Maybe a few, but I mean, it was pretty close. And then he is getting together with Lana, and they're about to have the baby, and his best friend is getting married to a woman that he likes, and just everything for him is going swimmingly. And, yes, on paper, that's very dramatic and tragic, and we're gonna feel worse for him, and we're gonna be rooting for him more if he's able to come back from that, but it felt very manufactured. This episode does a really good job of revealing things to us in often pretty logical ways, and even things that I don't think we got to organically. I like scenes like this where I'm expecting when he starts clapping, both of them to be dropping the axe that they played in the funeral, and they're to have a conversation about how they killed Lex together, and it turns out that they are enemies themselves. I like that a lot. So now that she's evil, her hair's different. That's a big TV trope with femme fatales. Look, she's a totally different character. Okay, these zoom-ins are just a little much, let me say. We're kind of continuing the drug metaphor with the red K. I wanted to bring that up again. Where Clark is kind of easing the pain by doing something where he doesn't feel responsible for his own actions. But again, I don't understand the thing with his taking off the red ring whenever his tattoo, or rather the brand, is hurting him. That seems to just be a contrivance so that he has a reason to take it off and be himself for a moment so that we can continue to sympathize with him and feel bad for what he's going through. This is one of the first times I think this show starts to feel real crazy and off the rails, just Lex losing on this island, and I like it a lot. I think it's kind of fun. Again, a little bit typical, but I like that this show is willing to go places like this. It's not the crazy off the rails. It's not crazy off the rails like... oh, and let me also say, I like that scene back-to-back with this slower, somber kind of downtime scene. Where Clark, of course, hates himself for leaving, and he's got to see the farm one more time, but he just feels like this is necessary in order to keep his family and friends safe. And again, I feel for him even though I'm conflicted about the choice he's making. But what I was going to say is it's not the same kind of off-the-wall insanity as some of the weird shark jump logic leaps, like, oh, the ship can make it possible for you to have children when you couldn't before. That is my litmus test for insane, goofy pseudoscience in this show. And I think to date, still the craziest thing this has done. When I say to date, I mean by this episode. It will get wackier than that. But that's when the show starts to lose me a little bit. I like Jonathan's speech here. We've got some not good speeches here, but I will tell you, or I'm here to tell you, we will have happy days again. It's a good speech. These two always felt like a real married couple to me. They always felt like they'd been together for years and years. And I really feel for them. This is a really touching moment. They're not going to let their family be broken up by this. They're going to compromise. They're going to do everything they have to survive and to stay together and to be as happy a family as humanly possible. I like Annette O'Toole's delivery of... it's small when she's talking about the apartment above the Talon that they're going to have to live in, which is where Lana used to live. This is all pretty good stuff. You know, this couple that just cannot help their son. And the ball is completely in his court right now. And you can't help but feel for this couple that have this super-powered kid that they couldn't control even if they wanted to. And I like the juxtaposition of that versus the birth father who wants to control his son, who, of course, is kind of the foil for Lionel, or the reflection of Lionel, I suppose. And once again, Chloe back in character. The Chloe from last season in this scene would have said, you can't save someone who wants to be saved, and then after Lana gets this conversation where she goes, she would just get up and leave, as opposed to telling her that she knows where Clark is. But we also have to do that to keep the plot moving. So I don't know if I should give it too much praise for that. But yeah, she's about, that's what it is. She's about to go put flyers up trying to get someone to tell her where Clark is. And Chloe's not going to let her go that far because she knows where he is. And I'm glad that she's not a jerk face enough to let Chloe go, or to let Lana go put up the posters. I think Lana's indignance in this scene is somewhat validated. He's not yourself is now, he's not himself is just the vernacular in this show now. There are, of course, a lot of other ways to say that. But we do that so much in the show, where there's some kind of brain-altering chemical or otherworldly device or whatever it is that makes a person act out of character. It's become such a staple in the show that there's like an almost trademarked phrase for it. To the point where I have a hard time thinking of any other way to describe it than, oh, he's not himself. So Lana's worried that she made the wrong call in not going with him to Metropolis. And of course, you can understand why she feels that way, but that wouldn't really have been the prudent thing to do. She says, I might have been able to talk him into going back. I want to think that if he had taken her with him, he would have ended up telling her who he is. And that's also part of the reason we didn't do that. But I do think it was in Lana's character, both to get off the motorcycle then and to get on it now. I say that. Of course, this character is very often all over the place, and we don't really know what to do with her or always who she is. But at least the more reasonable, likable version of this character, when we get her, that seems to be maybe what that person would do. Okay, so the LL necklace, is that... I forget if we've seen that before. Is it a necklace? Yeah, it is a necklace. Or my guess is it's his mother's necklace, because it says LL, and it's feminine. And of course, Helen's name doesn't begin with an L, unless she were Helena and you shortened it to Lena, but we've never done that. She's always been a Helen, although, well, let me say that, I think the necklace is also in his head. I don't think that came from the plane or anything, and also... Oh, no, of course. So, that is the hallucination of this guy, Lewis's father. But I wonder what that necklace is about, because, again, it's a feminine. So it must just all be weird stuff going on in his head. That's another thing that we count on this show, weird hallucinations and dreams. They've always just been crazy dreams before, but I'm going to count in hallucinations. This is our first of those, I think. And sometimes we do these kinds of hallucinations and I don't buy it. I'm like, is that person really crazy enough to have that? And we won't play it like they're actually nuts, but we just want to personify something. I buy it here, because he's been on this island for a while, and you have the guy at the native at the, or not the native, but he's on a boat, the guy at the end who says, the real typical Jamaican guy who's like, yeah man, who says that this island does weird things to people's minds, and you know, just the isolation being there that long. And I buy that, you know, 3 months there, it takes him that long before he starts to really hallucinate, although I don't know if he's been seeing that guy this whole time. Actually, I think he has. So maybe that happens a little bit too quickly. But anyway, what I was going to say about the Helen thing is it's interesting that Lex's sister in Smallville and in comics now is named Lena Luthor, and in this show he marries a woman named Helen. I think we're doing a good job of being consistent about the kind of bad that Clark is when he's on red kryptonite, and me buying that whenever he gets off of it, he's still Clark Kent, and he's going back and forth, and it's pretty natural. It's simply a guy who's shedding his inhibitions, but he's in enough control that he doesn't shed them all the way, or once again, the idea is, and it's an interesting nature-nurture question. The idea seems to be that if you don't already have it in you to do the worst, most horrible things, unless I suppose you were pushed that far, and maybe he's not, it's not like anybody who puts on a red kryptonite ring, if they were Kryptonian anyway, would start murdering people or try to take over the world. And so I like that the Clark Kent who's raised by these Kents, you know, how, as I've said before, how different is he from the Man of Steel version? This kid, even when he lowers his inhibitions, is not about to go, you know, try to be a fascist and take over everything. Now, again, I might be praising it too much for that. When we get to the end, not the fascist thing, but the idea that he's not hurting anyone. When we get to the end, he does throw Jonathan up against a wall really hard, and it could have killed him if he didn't have Kryptonian powers. So Clark is just lashing out. He doesn't really think all this. We know that, obviously, from previous episodes, but also from how he felt without the red kryptonite ring when he was in the loft. I think he's just really angry that anybody has found him, and deep down just wants everyone to be safe, and so he's going to say whatever he has to say. And I think it's easier for him on red kryptonite to try to turn all of this into the world versus me, woe is me, and even have some kind of conspiratorial nonsense when he gets to the end, and you two are working together now, with Jor-El giving him his Kryptonian powers. So Jonathan's going to do something weird here that I don't really buy. Oh, there's a scene in between it. I'll talk about it when we get there, when he goes into the cave. So I think Clark just works with Morgan Edge because he needs something to do. He wants some kind of a sense of purpose. And yeah, he, like in Red, you know, he continues to wish that he could have all the things that he didn't have growing up. That's all superficial. Deep down, he doesn't really care about that stuff beyond anything else, but it's, you know, there's an allure of power there. And again, I like the kind of innocence in it, that it doesn't go any further than it does. Again, I don't want to give it too much praise, because it also reads to me like he doesn't go any farther than he does just because he's not an ambitious person. Clark Kent doesn't have interests beyond Lana Lang. He really doesn't. And so I buy that that kid might not even think about, oh, goodness, there's all these wonderful things I can do with my powers. I don't want to think that's what it is, but it is hard not to read it that way to some degree. This guy reminds me a little bit of Sawyer from Lost. And I think he's doing a pretty good job of channeling Crazy Lex himself, I think. I mean, obviously he's not doing a Rosenbaum impression, but he's bringing the same kind of intensity, the same brand of lunacy to it. And he does feel very much like a figment of Lex's imagination. And he's, in some ways, kind of the crazed psychopath that Lex will become later, though he hides it from the general public. Leave comments if you watched this when it was on, or if I'm sure most of you guys have seen this before watching it here with me. Did you, when you first saw this, predict this? Think that it was in his head? Because I think that's pretty callable. But what I like about it is that if that was a real person, he would be dead now. And again, this is a thing that informs Lex's character and where he is now. He did not like what he saw of himself in that guy. He is constantly worried that Clark might be right and that destiny wins out ultimately. That you can't fight, or at least nature versus your own sense of reason. Are we self-aware people with? I mean, obviously we're self-aware, but are we people with the ability to choose, or is choice an illusion? So the cave wall sealing up makes me think that, I mean, obviously that is all related to the to what Jor-El is doing to Clark and the brand in his chest and all of that, which suggests that he did. At least there's a correlation. I was going to say it would suggest that he did want Clark to go into the cave, even though it doesn't seem like he really needed to, and that everything he needed was in the ship. And ultimately, it's, as I said last episode, just a bunch of stuff that happened, and there isn't really any forethought in what exactly Jor-El is doing and what it all means. I don't buy, this is what I was going to say earlier, that Jonathan would drop the key there and leave it there. He knows that Lionel still owns the cave, still has conservative, what's the word? I've lost the word. But he still is, he still owns it, he still comes down here, he made a kryptonite key, and he's trying to find out everything he can about Clark. He already knows too much, and Lionel would not leave that there. That's ridiculous. So Jor-El here is gonna reveal that it wasn't at all what we were made to think it was last episode, because we wrote ourselves into a corner and we didn't want to make things happen too quickly. So this was just a test to see if he was ready to start his journey, whatever it is that he wanted him to do. Jonathan says, oh, he's too young, he needs more time. To do what, Jonathan? Are you with Jor-El about his taking over the world, as the written message in the ship said back in Rosetta? Are you okay with that? And I don't buy, I mean, it feels like Jor-El's almost just messing with him. I don't buy that Jor-El needs a vessel for any of this. He's so powerful. It seems like he can do anything he wants to. And that's my big irritation with the Kryptonian stuff in this show, is there just are no rules. Jor-El is God. And if you're tired of hearing me say it, get ready, because I will say it 100 more times before this series is over. This is going by really quick. We are already toward the end here. Clark was hired to go rob Lionel's office. It's going to be fun when we finally see Morgan Edge and Lionel Luthor get together. They were childhood friends. Of course, Lionel is in cahoots with people like this, and that helped him build his empire. And I always like seeing people try to take advantage of Clark's powers. That's what would happen if somebody in the real world had abilities like this. A lot of people would just try to exploit them for their own personal gain, not turn them into the government to be dissected. This is another cliffhanger that would have been great over a season, I think. Maybe even better than last episode, but I really appreciate that this takes 3 episodes, that we don't wrap it up in a nice bow here. It still wraps up too easily, again, because of kind of, I don't know, goalpost moving. We're saying that Jor-El is ready for Clark to go, you know, on his journey, but oh no, that was just a test. And Chloe's gonna go evil. Well, no, actually, she's not. And this took me by surprise, threw me for a loop when I first saw it. I like how crazy we let this all go. Again, it's nuts that Jor-El can just give people powers. I guess that's kind of out of Superman 2, you know, where he's able to take powers away. I guess he can give them back, but it was supposed to be very, very difficult there, even though it was a little bit too easy for him to give it back to him. And to be continued. Again. But there won't be a 3-month jump next time. So let's go ahead and go to the count. Oh, before we do that, I wanted to mention that Season 3 is where we start adding, or we change the end credits music to something a little bit more driving and intense, but it still has a sense of hope in the music there. Okay, so here's the count. I'm going to, and some people might not agree with this, I'm going to count human beings who get Kryptonian powers as Kryptofreaks. They don't get their powers from kryptonite, but it's crypto something. We didn't even talk about Clark calling himself Cal through all this, by the way, which is interesting that he would give himself the name that, you know, his birth name, even though he's being defiant against Jor-El and frankly both of his fathers. That's an interesting choice. I don't even know what read to give on that. It's just interesting that he would choose that name. But anyway, so I'm gonna say that Jonathan Kent is our Kryptofreak for this episode. That's maybe stretching the definition a little bit, but it is a Kryptonian artifact, and kryptonite, after all, comes from Krypton. So most of the time, Kryptofreaks are people who get their powers from kryptonite, but I'm going to go ahead and call Jonathan one of those. That also makes him a main character Kryptofreak, which is the third of those that we've had. We have another character, or instance, I guess, of a character who's not themselves, bringing that to 13, and this is an extension of the last one, so I don't know if I should count it, but within each episode, I guess I will just say, I will just go ahead and count it again, because this is an episode in which we're seeing that happen. I don't count love triangles every time. I count those as singular instances of them, so maybe that's inconsistent with that. I don't know, but he does continue to use Red K here, and so I'm gonna go ahead and count it as a thing that's happening this episode. We have a not a fake death, but a false death. So I'm going to count that in the fake death category. That's 2 of those we've had so far. Our first bullet time in a little while, 21 of those now so far, getting into the 3rd season. We have one kind of rude super speed exit at the beginning. He's not, Clark isn't actually, well, actually I should count 2 of them, because it happens in the funeral, and it happens during the, during a robbery at the beginning. So, is it a robbery? It's one of the big scenes with bad guys. I forget now. I should have written that down. Anyway, so I'm going to say we've got 2 rude super speed exits this episode, although different from the ones we usually get, because he is not standing right in front of somebody when it happens. I only counted 1 walking away angry this episode. If anybody else noticed another one, let me know. And it's interesting because it's Lana in the Talon, even though the conversation keeps going, which is not a thing that you see all the time. She walks away, and then Chloe pursues her, and the conversation continues. I also meant to mention, speaking of the Talon, that it's also odd that it's taken a whole 3 months for the investors to try to shut down the Talon. Since Lex has been gone. I don't know if it would take that long, or at the very least, it's just really easy that all of these things are being talked about for the first time, it seems, on the very same day once the show returns. It's almost as if everyone involved knows they're in a TV show. We have, as I said earlier, 1 character from the comics, that's Morgan Edge, and I'm not doing a tally of those because I'm sure I'm going to miss some, but I'll point them out when we see them. I'm doing the same thing with blatant DC references. I'm not counting them, but I will bring them up whenever we see them. We have, as I mentioned earlier, another hallucination or dream sequence. That is 5 of those so far, and we'll have a bunch more of those, I'm sure, as we move along. and I mentioned the main character, Kryptofreak, and finally we have a funeral, and I haven't been counting those, but I remember there being quite a few funerals in this show, and we really like to use that for the sake of drama. I also should be counting hospital scenes, and it was too little too late when I finally thought of that, because we have way too many really dramatic, we just got to the hospital kinds of scenes, especially directly after a commercial break. Have you ever noticed that? Very often, it seems like we have these kind of aftermath scenes where we're nursing our wounds in the hospital, and I'd go as far as to say that the hospital sometimes in this show is a kind of a gathering our thoughts place or expository kind of setting, sort of like the magic meeting room in Star Trek TNG or Voyager, what SF3 calls the magic meeting room scenes when they're in the conference room. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 4. It's, I don't think, nearly as good as the last one, and I don't like the things that we're kind of walking back and being retroactive about. Helen is a big one. I think that's super glaring, and they already had done that at the end of last episode, but now that she knows it, she's a completely different character. But I like how conflicted Clark is, and I like how conflicted I am about it. That I can't decide if he is being, you know, like unreasonable, if there's something else he should be doing with this, or and that's just because I still don't have enough of a read and a grasp of this character, because he is a little bit too all over the map, and he's not well drawn enough. But I do think that his plight in the conflict is a really kind of rough spot to be in, and even though he's doing the wrong thing, I still feel bad for him, and it's impressive, especially with this show, when I feel that way. So that's going to be it for me today. Thanks a bunch for watching. The episode for next time is Phoenix, and I didn't remember that even being the name of that episode, so that's really interesting. So we'll have a kind of the end of a 3-parter here, and it won't be months and months before it comes out. I should see you again next week, and once again, leave your comments, let me know your feelings and opinions on this episode, and I'll see you then. Thanks for listening.
Counting is wonderful, counting is marvelous, counting's terrific, and how